From New York, this is Democracy Now!
We are protecting our land and the life on it, the animals, the birds, even the tribe who are here too. There's so much destruction of nature happening. Good trees with wood as hard as steel being cut down and taken away.
An indigenous forest protector has been shot dead in the Brazilian Amazon by illegal loggers. It's part of a wave of violence targeting indigenous activists since the election of Brazil's far-right president Jair Bolsonaro last year. We'll go to Brazil for the latest. Then we look at the homeless crisis in San Francisco.
It is absolutely a national responsibility. It is first and foremost a federal responsibility to make sure all of our people have the basic needs that allow them to thrive, not merely survive. And unfortunately for us, homeless people are victimized by poor decisions at multiple levels in our government.
Then people gather in Greensboro, North Carolina this weekend to mark the 40th anniversary of the Greensboro Massacre, when Ku Klux Klansmen and American Nazis attacked a group of anti-racist protesters in broad daylight in 1979, killing 5 people and injuring 10.
I wish that Mike and Jim and Bill and Sandy and Caesar had not been sacrificed in 1979 because of their intense belief in justice and a living wage and dignity.
The Greensboro Massacre, 40 years later. All that and more coming up. Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In news from Washington, D.C., all 4 White House officials who were scheduled to testify to lawmakers today in the House ongoing impeachment hearings have refused to testify. The officials refusing are John Eisenberg, Deputy Counsel to the President for National Security Affairs and Legal Advisor to the National Security Council; Robert Blair, Assistant to the President and Senior Advisor to the Acting Chief of Staff; Michael Ellis, Senior Associate Counsel to the President and Deputy Legal Advisor to the National Security Council; and Brian McCormick, Associate Director for Natural Resources, Energy and Science at the Office of Management and Budget. The impeachment inquiry is investigating whether President Trump withheld military aid to Ukraine in order to pressure the Ukrainian president to investigate Trump's political rival, Joe Biden, and his son. The lawyer for the whistleblower who went public about Trump's July 25th phone call with the Ukrainian president says he will answer written questions from Republicans who are demanding the whistleblower testify in person. Trump has previously compared the whistleblower to a treasonous spy who deserves the death penalty, raising concerns about the official's safety. In northern Syria, Turkish-backed forces have been accused of committing war crimes against Syrian Kurdish troops. In one graphic cell phone video, Turkish-backed troops are shown stomping on a dead woman's body, calling her a whore. The woman, Amara Renas, was a member of YPJ, an all-woman unit that played a significant role in the battle against ISIS. Her unit and other Syrian Kurdish units were supported by the United States until President Trump abruptly withdrew U.S. soldiers from the region, clearing the way for Turkey's invasion. U.S. officials say some of the actions depicted in the videos likely constitute war crimes. In Turkey, hundreds of people have been arrested for expressing opposition to the Turkish military offensive in Syria. The Pentagon's left some U.S. troops in Syria, they say, to secure control of the oil fields. On Sunday, U.S. soldiers came under fire from a Turkish artillery attack, forcing the U.S. troops to temporarily vacate their post. Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren released details of her Medicare for All plan Friday. The plan says she would raise investment gains taxes on the top 1% of American households in order to help pay for the program, which calls for $20.5 trillion in federal spending over a decade. She would also levy a 6% annual tax on net worth above $1 billion and collect about $9 trillion from employers. In response, response, presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders called his plan to fund Medicare for All more progressive, saying he's worried that Warren's plan could have a negative impact on job creation. President Trump's announced plans to nominate Dr. Stephen Hahn to be the next commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. Hahn's a top executive at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, which is considered to be one of the nation's best cancer centers. An oncologist specializing in lung cancer and sarcoma, Hahn does not have significant policy experience. The Environmental Protection Agency is slated to roll back key Obama-era regulations to protect waterways near coal-fired power plants from being flooded with toxic coal ash today. Coal ash contains mercury, arsenic, and other toxic chemicals. Food and Water Watch has vowed to sue the Trump administration over the rollback of the rules, which it says would, quote, lead directly to more water contamination, more birth defects, more childhood cancer, and more pain and suffering for American families, all for the sake of a dirty industry's last gasp at profits. In more environmental news, a group of automakers, including General Motors, Toyota, and Fiat Chrysler, are siding with the Trump administration in the ongoing fight between Washington and California over car fuel efficiency standards. California has sued the Trump administration after it revoked California's right to set pollution limits on cars. A slew of other auto manufacturers, including Ford, Honda, and Volkswagen, have sided with California in this battle. The ongoing dispute has left auto giants grappling with which fuel efficiency standards to follow over the coming decade. And the New York Times is reporting the United States and Russia may be left without a single nuclear arms limitation treaty, which would allow the two countries to expand their nuclear arsenals without limits. President Trump pulled the United States out of the INF agreement. That's the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement. Now, a Russian arms official says there may not be enough time to renegotiate and replace another more important nuclear agreement, the New START Treaty, before it expires in early 2021. In northern Mali, over 50 soldiers were killed in an attack on a military post Friday, one of the deadliest attacks on Mali's military in recent years. The army called it a terrorist attack. ISIS has claimed responsibility. In a separate attack, a French soldier deployed to Mali was killed in a roadside bomb blast Saturday, which is also claimed by ISIS. Anti-government protests continue to sweep parts of the Arab world. In Iraq, protesters blockaded parts of the capital Baghdad Sunday. Iraqi protesters also stormed the Iranian consulate in the Shia holy city of Karbala, hanging Iraqi flags and spray-painting "Karbala is free, Iran out, out." Security forces killed at least 3 Iraqi protesters, bringing the total death toll to over 250. In Lebanon, mass protests against the government continued over the weekend, with tens of thousands of protesters filling the streets of Beirut, Tripoli, and other Lebanese cities to demand the ouster of Lebanon's political elite. And in Algeria, tens of thousands of people filled the streets of the capital Algiers Friday to mark the 65th anniversary of the War of Independence from France and to demand a new revolution rather than an upcoming election they say will be rigged.
For a second republic and to liberate Algeria from traitors' hands. We are against the elections with the current government. We don't want traitors anymore. We don't want an Algeria like the one of today anymore.
In Brazil, indigenous leader Paulo Paulino Guajajara was shot dead Saturday in the Amazon in the northeastern state of Maranhão. Illegal loggers reportedly ambushed and then opened fire on land protectors with the group Guardians of the Forest. Another guardian was injured in the ambush but escaped. Attacks against indigenous people have increased since Brazil's far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro, took office and opened the Amazon up to increase logging, mining, and agribusiness companies. We'll have more on Brazil after headlines. In Nepal, the United States global gag rule banning U.S. funding to foreign NGOs that provide any information about abortion has silenced Nepal's most popular late-night radio host. Shikha Sharma is Nepal's go-to person for women across Nepal seeking information about safe sex and reproductive health. But after President Trump signed an executive order reactivating the global gag rule in one of his first acts in office, Sharma was told she couldn't even utter the word abortion, which is legal in Nepal, for the 2 days a week that her program was funded by U.S. aid. Indian authorities are warning Delhi has turned into a gas chamber with toxic smog blanketing one of the world's most populated cities. Officials have declared a public health emergency and are distributing over 5 million gas masks to residents who are worried about the physical and psychological impact of the pollution.
Apart from breathing issues, pollution is also pressurizing us psychologically. That's what's happening now. It's not winter, so it's definitely not fog. We are walking around with masks.
German officials in the eastern city of Dresden have declared a Nazi emergency as far-right movements continue to gain power. Dresden is the birthplace of Germany's Islamophobic movement. In recent elections, more than a quarter of Dresden voters supported the anti-immigrant far-right AfD party. Meanwhile, in Norway, officials arrested American white supremacist Greg Johnson hours before he was slated to give a speech at a far-right conference in Oslo Saturday, saying Johnson's hate speech posed a threat. Johnson's expressed support for Anders Breivik, a Norwegian right-wing terrorist who killed 77 people, mainly children, in 2011 in the deadliest attack in Norway since World War II. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a man was arrested after allegedly throwing acid in the face of a Peruvian man and calling him illegal, telling him to get out of this country. Mahmoud Vialaz is a U.S. citizen. Milwaukee says they are investigating the attack on him as a hate crime. Saudi Arabia's state-owned oil company, Saudi Aramco, is going public in what could be the world's biggest initial public offering. Saudi Aramco is planning to list on the Riyadh Stock Exchange. The company is estimated to be worth over $1 trillion. The Philadelphia City Council unanimously voted to pass a domestic workers' bill of rights. The new legislation would require employers to provide nannies, housekeepers, and home health aides with a written contract detailing hourly wages, overtime benefits, meal breaks, weekly schedules, and paid time off. The bill would affect more than 16,000 workers in Philadelphia. It must now be passed, approved by the mayor, Jim Kenney. In New York City, over 1,000 people flooded the streets of downtown Brooklyn Friday to protest police brutality against residents accused of evading the subway fare. A recent viral video showed police officers tackling and arresting at gunpoint a subway rider for allegedly not paying the $2.75 entrance fee. This is Tiffany Ramos at Friday's protest.
There's a lot of people who can't make ends meet. They're about to build like 4 new jails. How does the city have money to build new jails, to put more police out there? Why can't we have more money and resources being devoted to education or to solve the homeless crisis, to fix our trains? This is not right, and we're here to hold police accountable for their actions. And we're here to make sure that no person of color gets criminalized for jumping the turnstile again.
And in sports news, members of baseball World Series champions, the Washington Nationals, are slated to visit President Trump in the White House today. But pitcher Sean Doolittle says he's boycotting the visit. Sean Doolittle has been an outspoken advocate for LGBT rights, disability rights, and refugees. Doolittle, who has a brother-in-law who's autistic, said he was boycotting the visit over Trump's mocking of a disabled reporter, as well as Trump's anti-LGBTQ policies and his attacks on refugees. Doolittle told the Washington Post, quote, "There's a lot of things, policies, I disagree with, but at the end of the day, it's more to do with the divisive rhetoric and the enabling of conspiracy theories and widening the divide in this country. At the end of the day, as much as I wanted to be there with my teammates and share that experience with my teammates, I can't do it," Sean Doolittle said. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show in Brazil, where an indigenous forest protector named Paulo Paulino Guajajara was shot dead in the Amazon by illegal loggers on Saturday. It's the latest attack in a wave of violence targeting indigenous land protectors since the election of Brazil's far-right President Jair Bolsonaro last year. Guajajara was killed when he and another forest protector were ambushed by a group of illegal loggers inside the Arariboia reservation in the northeastern state of Maranhão. He was part of a group called Guardians of the Forest. Guajajara spoke to Reuters in September about his efforts to save the Amazon.
We are protecting our land and the life on it, the animals, the birds, even the tribe who are here too. There's so much destruction of nature happening. Good trees with wood as hard as steel being cut down and taken away. I'm scared sometimes, but we have to lift up our heads and act. We are here fighting.
Attacks against indigenous people in the Amazon have spiked since Bolsonaro came to office. His administration's work to open the Amazon even further to logging, mining, and agribusiness companies while violating the land rights of indigenous peoples. Earlier this year, 8 former environment ministers warned Bolsonaro's administration was systematically destroying Brazil's environmental policies, with one former minister saying Brazil is becoming an exterminator of the future. To find out more about the situation in the Amazon and the murder, we speak to 2 guests. João Coimbra Souza is a field coordinator and legal advisor for Amazon Watch. He's joining us from São Luís in the northeastern state of Maranhão, the state where Paulo Paulino Guajajara was murdered. And in San Francisco, Christian Poirier is program director at Amazon Watch. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let's go to Brazil to speak with our first guest, João Coimbra. Can you explain what took place in the Amazon, what you understand happened to this guardian of the Amazon?
First of all, good morning. Thank you, Amy, for having me. So, the situation that the guardians of the forest face today is the struggle for survival and the protections of their way of living. The indigenous people on the Amazon, they have little protection from the state government, from the federal government, and as you said, Amy, the rhetoric from Bolsonaro's speeches further entitles landowners and logging and illegal miners to invade furthermore indigenous lands. So the struggle that the plight that indigenous people have is to protect the forest, to protect their way of living and their whole life. So what happened to Paulo Paulino is that he went hunting with his cousin when they were ambushed by 5 gunmen, and Laércio, luckily enough, he was shot in the arm, so he could hide. Unfortunately, Paulo Paulino was fatally shot in the head and died right away. Laércio then, the other guardian of the forest, as you said, Laércio Guajajara, he ran 10 kilometers while wounded to a close-by aldeia, which is how indigenous villages are called here in Brazil. Then he was helped by his fellow Guajajara and took to a hospital. And this is why we know all of this in such great detail.
I want to go to a clip right now of the Guardians of the Forest that was produced by Survival International. Paulo Paulino appears in the clip as the Guardians coordinator, Olímpio Guajajara, warns of the risks to their lives.
We're here in the Rari Boys indigenous territory. We are the guardians of the forest. Loggers are paying gunmen to kill some of the guardians of Rari Boys. We're all worried about these threats. Gunshots have been fired at some of the guardians' houses. We don't want war. We want to resist. Here in Arari Boys, there are 2 indigenous peoples, the Guajajara and the Awa, who are the most vulnerable people in the world. We want the Brazilian authorities to help protect the lives of the guardians whose lives are threatened.
So I'd like to bring in Christian Poirier as well into this conversation, program director at Amazon Watch. If you could talk about the community you have worked with as well, the Guajajara, one of the largest indigenous groups in Brazil, and talk about who the Guardians are and how what they're fighting fits into the whole fight for sustainability on the planet and to save the lungs of the planet, the Amazon rainforest.
Yes, thank you, Amy. The Guajajara, like other indigenous groups in Brazil, have been abandoned by the state to defend their territories with volunteer groups, basically policing massive territories. Araraboye territory is 1,600 square miles. That's larger than Rhode Island. And they're doing this without any federal support. And what they're doing to defend these territories, these are some of the last forests left in the state of Maranhão, which is the state that straddles both the Amazon and the Cerrado biomes, incredibly important forests that are left in this area. They're doing this on behalf of all of humanity because they are protecting the critically important Amazon forests that sustain our climate, protect our climate, power, or I should say, fuel the rainfall all over Brazil, but also here in this country, in the state of California. Rainfall is slackening due to the fact the Amazon is being decimated today. And the Guardians of the Forest are doing this work, therefore, on behalf of all of us, but without the support that they deserve. Their rights are enshrined in Brazil's constitution, their rights to territory and to their way of life. Yet they have been systematically deprived of these rights. And what we witnessed today, or 2 days ago, with the murder of Paulinho, was an example of that, a manifestation of the violence that's growing in these communities.
I want to turn to another leader of the Guardians of the Forest. Democracy Now! Spoke to Sonia Guajajara during the climate strike march here in New York in September. She's a leader of the Brazilian Indigenous Peoples Articulation.
I'm here today to participate in the climate march, bringing the voices of the indigenous peoples of Brazil to denounce all the destruction of the environment, the destruction of the Amazon, and the legalization of a genocide against indigenous people. For 519 years, indigenous people in Brazil have been resisting, and we've been resisting by fighting against the political and economic powers that, under the name of development and in the name of progress, are authorizing more and more exploitation of our natural resources. Exploração dos recursos naturais, explorando minérios, exploiting mines, exploiting the rivers, and it's directly affecting our way of life. Afetando diretamente os nossos modos de vida. E a Amazônia está queimando, né, neste momento. The Amazon is burning at this exact moment. Lots of territories are on fire. Nós atribuímos o aumento desses incêndios a esse discurso, né, do governo Bolsonaro de. We attribute the increase in the fires to the rhetoric of the government of Jair Bolsonaro that incites attacks, that incites invasions, and incites deforestation. The practices of the Bolsonaro government are consolidating this government as the biggest enemy of indigenous people and the environment.
Over the summer, as the fires raged in the Amazon, Sonia Guajajara said in a statement, "We're putting our bodies and our lives on the line to try to save our territories. We've been warning for decades about the violations we've suffered across Brazil. The predatory behavior of loggers, miners, and ranchers has been getting much worse under the anti-indigenous government of Bolsonaro, who normalizes, incites, and empowers violence against the environment and against us," she said. As we begin to wrap up, João Coimbra, as we speak to you in Brazil right now, how are people protecting themselves, particularly indigenous community, and who are these loggers? Who is believed killed Paulo Paulinho?
So Maranhão historically is a place of a lot of land conflicts, and mostly of those conflicts began with the colonization of Brazil. So we have large landowners that are going going forward with the expansion of their territories. When you see how well protected the indigenous lands are, you understand economically wise why they want to invade such territories. So the killing of Paulo Paulino Guajajara and the attack that also suffered Laércio Guajajara, it's directly linked to that idea of eternal expansion of the agribusiness, which is something that we understand that it's impossible. However, the presence of the guardians of the forest, it represents heavy losses on the illegal business of logging and the selling of our woods. So it's and when you see that all those landowners and their economic power, they always translate to political power as well for the oligarchies presented that take part that is part of the conjunctural context here in Maranhão. So everything is connected, and in that sense of the political rhetoric of Bolsonaro's and the invasion of those lands and the overgrowing power of the larger landowners.
And Christian Poirier, in your last comment, you're here in the United States with Amazon Watch. President Trump is close to Jair Bolsonaro. In fact, Bolsonaro is called the Trump of the Amazon. What are you calling for here?
We are calling for a rigorous and independent investigation into the murder of Paulinho Guajajara, which is part of a growing trend of violence against indigenous peoples in Brazil. 135 indigenous peoples were murdered in 2018, according to the Indigenous Missionary Council in Brazil, and that was a 23% increase over the previous year. This year, we're expecting to see an enormous spike in this kind of violence and the impunity that comes with it. So we need to see rigorous governance installed in these territories that are falling victim, and their communities falling victim to violence, to impunity, to destruction, to the reckless expansion of the agribusiness sector, of logging mafias. And we need to see the state step in where it has been so brutally absent to address this crisis, which is a human rights crisis. It's a crisis for humanity because of the implications of the destruction of the Amazon and its peoples that are fighting to defend it. The Guajajara are one of the great hopes of the Amazon, as are indigenous peoples in general. We need to support them. We cannot have regimes like the Jair Bolsonaro regime, which is true and a mirror image in some ways to the Trump regime here in this country. We absolutely need to fight these despots on many levels, including on the international level. There are markets that are sustaining these actors, these logging mafias, the worst actors in Brazil's agribusiness sector, that are exporting commodities to the north. We are buying these products. We are complicit in what's happening today. And our financial institutions like JP Morgan Chase and BlackRock, BNP Paribas, Santander in Spain, are fueling this crisis with their money to the worst actors in the soy, in the beef, and in the timber industries, for example, that are decimating the Amazon and its peoples today. We have a responsibility in the north. In fact, PIB, the indigenous organization from Brazil that Sonia Guajajara represents, is currently traveling in Europe, across 12 countries in Europe, to denounce this mounting crisis to the rights of indigenous peoples, to the future of the forest, and to our collective future. They are touring Europe to bring a message to the world: indigenous blood, not another drop. And what we witnessed today, or 2 days ago, was the spilling of this blood. We can no longer tolerate what's taking place today. We must all act to end this crisis.
Christian Poirier, I want to thank you for being with us in San Francisco, and João Coimbra Sousa in São Luís in the northeastern state of Maranhão in Brazil, both with Amazon Watch. When we come back, we go to San Francisco to speak with the unhoused as we deal with the growing crisis of homelessness. Stay with us.
Chegar, pra ter a certeza só basta acreditar. Justiça, sei que dia vai chegar. Pra ter a certeza só basta acreditar. Lua cheia, pensou teve esquema. Na primeira achou problema, na segunda teve dilema. Se encontra uma esquema, nunca mais viu problema. Não viu mais de exportar, tem que poder marcar pra ganhar bom lugar. Respeitar e preservar, mas tocar no baracá a gente tem que batalhar e no rap protestar para conquistar. Justiça, sei que dia vai chegar. Pra ter a certeza só basta acreditar. Justiça, sei que dia
Justice by Kunami MC. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to the second part of our special coverage of the homelessness crisis in California, amid skyrocketing housing prices and rising inequality, the number of unhoused people across America's richest state is booming. Homelessness in San Francisco has spiked at least 30% since 2017. This, according to the San Francisco Chronicle. In Oakland, it's grown by nearly 50% as more people have been forced into the streets. Encampments have popped up from Los Angeles to the Bay Area and other city centers across the state. But while advocates push for more affordable housing solutions, they say city governments have been cracking down on unhoused people instead, with increasingly punitive measures that criminalize homelessness. In San Francisco, advocates say police sweeps of their belongings happen nearly every day. Well, we recently returned from Democracy Now! Democracy Now! Recently returned from San Francisco to speak with unhoused people and their advocates about conditions there. We first met Kelly Cutler, a volunteer with the Coalition on Homelessness, under the freeway just outside of the downtown San Francisco area where a number of unhoused people had set up tents and makeshift shelters.
My name is Kelly Cutler, and we are down on Division, and this is an area where a couple years ago we had a bunch of encampments, over 300 within a few block radius.
And can you talk about who lives under the freeway here? Tell us the story of Neil.
There was this gentleman, a 70-year-old disabled veteran named Neil Taylor, and I used to come down and see him every time I would go out on outreach. He had been out here for a few years, and because he said that with his wife dying that he could no longer live in the house where she was, and he ended up dying in his tent right under the freeway over there. He was a veteran and was working on getting into housing, but it didn't come soon enough. And there was one time that he was in the emergency room, and the city was coming through and doing a sweep. And I tried to stop him. I said, "This is Neil's stuff, at least bag and tag." And they said no, and they threw all of his belongings from his music that he wrote to his walker, and they threw it into a crusher truck and demolished it.
How typical is this?
This happens every day. If you walk around, it's not one person here or there that will share this kind of experience. It's everyone.
Describe what happens, what gets taken.
The number one thing that the city tends to target are tents, because they focus on tents and visible homelessness. The mayor had put out a press release earlier this year saying that since she became mayor that the tent numbers have decreased, I think it was 34%. And we said, well, does that mean that there's that many more resources that were available? Like, what happened? What the reality is that they're going through and they're taking people's tents and as well as the rest of their belongings. They will give them a misdemeanor, 647E for illegal lodging, and take their tent as evidence and leave them there.
And then what happens when they're scattered, when the encampments are broken down by the authorities? Where do they go?
Well, there isn't really anywhere to go, so people will oftentimes go to the next block, or if they're pushed out even further, they will just scatter to wherever they can be where they're not going to be harassed. People experiencing homelessness are often the victims of violence and targeted, and it's a regular occurrence that we hear about. And so by breaking up community and support, just it would be the same for house people, where if you're breaking up protection and safety, it's people are going to get hurt.
We've come under the highway and have come up to a kind of makeshift cardboard shelter. A man has emerged from it. His name is Moon, so we're going to talk to him right now. This is your cardboard shelter?
Yeah, this is my cardboard shelter. Yes, it is.
How long have you been here?
In this particular spot?
Yeah.
Maybe a month or two. It's about the longest I've been in one spot, a long time out here. So. And
you built this?
Yeah. This isn't the first one I built. I've actually built about 4 of them, 5 of them.
Can you talk about living out here under the freeway? Why are you here?
Found myself in a couple years ago, in an unfortunate situation, and I ended up on the street. So I kind of flocked to this group of people and found a little bit of safety net here with them, and because it's the only way to really live out here, and then kind of security. And I just been kind of going day by day to get everything. It's extremely difficult living on the streets, being homeless, especially I don't know if it's different elsewhere, but here it is. So just at the moment trying to get things together so I get off the streets.
Where were you born?
I was born here. It's very odd being homeless in the city you were born in.
How long have you been homeless?
About 2 years.
Do you see yourself getting out of this situation? What could help you get out?
I do see myself getting out of the situation. It's once you get into the situation, it's extremely difficult to get out. It's kind of like a pit trap. They'll wake you up at 4:30 in the morning every morning for 2 weeks.
Who's they? The police?
The police, DPW. People that work for the city, they'll wake you up every morning for 4:30 in the morning, and if you don't move fast enough, they'll take your things, and then you have to get your things all over again.
Can you get them back?
No, you can't. They say you can, but you can't. I have several friends. All of my friends out here have tried to go get their things back, and never, ever have I seen anybody successful.
What kind of services are provided for you to help you get out of this situation?
Well, they supposedly have navigation out here, but that they can take you and give you last time they offered me a 7-day stay, which the 7-day stay doesn't help me at all.
In a shelter?
In a shelter, because then I'll just back out here and on the street.
Cooper, as we tour around this freeway system and the people who are living below, you're called the people's medic. You're a firefighter, disabled, you're in the streets. Talk about the conditions and the medical condition of people on the streets.
There's a lot of issues out here with a lot of injuries due to just being out on the street in general, as well as fights and things like that. But the basic, all in all, is when the cops do these sweeps, people get stressed out. Because you have to get your stuff moved within an hour or less than that, and so people end up hurting themselves, breaking fingers, arms. There's been 2 broken legs, splitting their head open, just trying to get this stuff quickly so they don't get arrested. So the stress that these sweeps cause people injuries like that, but also that we don't have running water out here. So people that do use that inject drugs and they're all clean. They use clean needles, majority of them. But bacteria is a killer of many, and there's a lot of abscesses out here due to bacteria and things getting on because people can't keep their hands clean. There's nowhere, restaurants or places will not allow people that are homeless in to use the restroom to even wash their hands. So that causes issues, because people can't be clean, and when they're not clean, infections and things are pass, person to person. So it's I'm seeing a lot of that abscesses as well as a lot of broken bones due to having to move within minutes or within less than a half hour. So it's increased, and just even in the last year and a half, I've noticed more injuries like that.
Will people go to emergency rooms?
No, they usually won't, just because they're looked down on by hospital staff. They're treated differently, and they don't want to deal with being looked at like that. Because the one thing I hear constantly out here on the street is it like, I wish people would stop looking at me like that. I wish they would stop, treating me like that. I'm a human. I'm a person. I have feelings, and so, and that's a lot of people don't usually say that. So we have a tough skin out here. We have to. So when we go to ask for help, we're dire need of help. And so when someone goes to the hospital and they get treated poorly, they're more likely not going to return. And also the sheriffs, they reside there pretty much, and they run people's names when you come in with an injury. They want to know why you have that. Why did you get stabbed or whatever? If you have a warrant or something, they're going to arrest you. And then now, that's going to keep them away from healthcare all in all. So people come in, I was dubbed a street medic by people out here. And people come and get me all hours of the night, day, whatever. And I grab my medical bag and I go to wherever they are, because I'm glad that they are asking for my help, because I give it to them whenever they need it.
Are you still living on the streets?
Yeah.
Do you foresee a time when you won't be on the streets?
I would love to be inside. That's the one thing that it's been a long time since I've been inside, and I really, it's not my choice to be out here, and it's hard to be out here, and it takes a lot out on you being out here, having to watch your back constantly. I'm very well respected out here, so I don't have a problem, but I'm getting kind of tired. I would like to be inside. I'm sick of being cold. I'm sick of being wet. I'm sick of wondering if my house is going to be there when I get home. I want to live a little normal life again, and hopefully soon. Hopefully.
What would help you get there?
Housing. Housing. I live on a small disability check, and I can't save up enough to even get first class and deposit. And I would love to just have a place I could vacuum a floor or do dishes. I took those things for granted before. I would give anything for that now. So I hate dishes. I would give anything to put my hand in some warm water and, do dishes, I miss it. So, yeah.
Thank you. That was Shauna Cooper-Arona. We went with her to the Tenderloin in San Francisco, where she showed us Hospitality House, a community center that's also home to the Coalition on Homelessness, and spoke to advocates there about the origins of homelessness in San Francisco. But first I asked Cooper how she ended up living on the streets.
Divorce led me onto the street. My ex-wife is the biggest civil litigation law firm in San Francisco, and we lived in Diamond Heights in San Francisco here for 10 years. And when we divorced, I lost everything, and I had nowhere to go. And I depleted my savings, my everything, staying on friends' couches. Hotels are very expensive, and then until I had nowhere left to go. And so San Francisco streets, here I come. So, yeah, and that's how I ended up without having a home. I can pay rent. It's hard to come up with that, $3,000 first last deposit. So it makes it very hard to save up that money when you're buying your food, you're trying to stay in hotels, you're trying to stay safe on the streets. You waste a lot of money by trying to survive.
How dangerous is it for a woman on the street?
It's pretty dangerous. You have to really have your wits about you. A lot of women, they camp together. They'll be around, so that they can keep each other safe. The women, we get propositioned constantly for, anything you can imagine under the sun. And if you're not, a lot of women get taken advantage of here.
My name's Jennifer Friedenbach. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition on Homelessness.
Is the problem of homelessness worse than it's ever been?
The ability for folks to get off the streets is a lot harder because the rents are so high in San Francisco. So people are on the streets for longer, and they're much more visible because their health care is so deteriorated. Their mental health and the addiction disorders sometimes are a lot more visible than they have been because long-term homelessness really causes some problems.
The tech companies that are coming into San Francisco, how do they affect what's happening, the whole issue of gentrification?
Yeah, so there's a dramatic effect on a couple different levels. I think for homeless people, of course, the housing price is skyrocketing. But there's another piece of it, and that is that all renters in San Francisco are insecure. And so for us, we've seen kind of a shift in some of the attitudes of folks because renters are seeing themselves in the eyes of other homeless people because they themselves feel like they're at risk. So our movement has really gathered a lot of strength over the last few years. We've had a lot of people who've come out of the woodworks that have really throwing down because they see this as potentially affecting them.
I see posters around President Reagan going way back from Reagan to Bush for 25 years, a spirit of abandon, and then the Trump agenda, privatization, the walling off America. Going back to Reagan and the deinstitutional of people from mental institutions, well, how does that affect what's happening on the streets today?
That actually was a movement from mental health consumers who were being locked up and being really mistreated inside institutions. And you know, unless somebody is harming someone or harming somewhere else or can't actually take care of themselves, you know, they should be housed in the community. What failed in that process is that we never ended up doing the community care that was supposed to take place instead of the institutions. The other thing that Ronald Reagan did do is that he cut everybody off of Social Security when he was the president. And what that meant is that people had to reapply to get back on Social Security. The folks who fell off were the folks with mental illnesses who could not navigate that system. Those were the folks that were using their Social Security checks to pay for their boarding care beds. And that's why we saw this huge number of mentally ill people on the streets back in the early 1980s. Now, we never took corrective action, and we've made a lot of decisions since that have made the situation even worse.
And what's happening under Trump?
Under Trump, I mean, we've got, you know, of course, inaction, but we have massive cuts to the housing choice vouchers. We have him putting in charge of housing and urban development of HUD, Ben Carson, who basically believes that HUD has no responsibility around homelessness. And when it is, in fact, the defunding of that same agency is what created homelessness in the first place. So, I mean, we're talking about a massive tragedy under Trump.
Joe Wilson, Executive Director, Hospitality House.
What do you think is the solution to homelessness in San Francisco?
A home. And we have to build the kind of housing that's affordable for very low-income people. Homelessness and poverty are economic problems that have economic solutions. These are not due to behavioral pathologies, and we have to encourage each other to see the economic solutions that are actually within our grasp. We are spending now more than $1 trillion on weapons of mass destruction every single year. Every hour in this country, we're spending upwards of $200 million, right, on weapons of mass destruction. That could go a long way toward solving the homelessness crisis, the poverty crisis, you know, in our cities across the country. And it would do well for all of us to invest in better elected leadership so that we can make better decisions about what our people really need. It is absolutely a national responsibility. It is first and foremost a federal responsibility to make sure all of our people have the basic needs that allow them to thrive, not merely survive, and to evade that responsibility, to shift it to someone else is not leadership. Right? That is escapism, and that is cowardice. And unfortunately for us, homeless people are victimized by poor decisions at multiple levels in our government.
Joe Wilson, Executive Director of Hospitality House in San Francisco. He himself was once homeless. To see our special report on California's criminalization on growing homeless encampments in Oakland, go to democracynow.org. When we come back, hundreds gather this weekend to remember the 40th anniversary of the Greensboro Massacre, where Ku Klux Klansmen and American Nazis attacked a group of anti-racist protesters in broad daylight, killing 5 people. Stay with us.
Feel the hunger when you sleep. No one She's standing there with open arms, and one night can last forever. And if you asked her,
8 full hours of sleep against me. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. Hundreds gathered this weekend to mark the 40th anniversary of the Greensboro Massacre when 40 Ku Klux Klansmen and American Nazis opened fire on an anti-Klan demonstration in Greensboro, North Carolina. Over the span of 88 seconds, the Klan and Nazis shot dead 5 anti-racist activists who were members of the Communist Workers' Party. 10 other activists were injured. No one was convicted in the massacre, but a jury did find the Greensboro police liable for cooperating with the KKK in a wrongful death. This is a clip from the documentary The Guns of November 3rd by Jim Waters, a news camera person who was on the scene and filmed that day. A warning to our television viewers, some of this is graphic.
We can take our country back from the Communist Party. We can take it back from the niggers. It's time for us to band together. If we have to get in the streets and fight and blood up to our knees, by God, it's time to get ready to fight. Give them what they want. Fight for this country. Yes, to the land. Yes, to the land. Yes, to the land.
Jumped out and just started shooting in the direction of the thickest concentration of people. They seemed to be aiming at particular people. There were several police in the area who did nothing until after these murderers left. Police came in immediately and started arresting people who were trying to help those who had fallen. Nelson Johnson, was taken into custody, kicked in the head by the police. He was bleeding from the arm as he was trying to help people. And the police did this, directly or indirectly. They set it up.
Images and sounds of the 1979 Greensboro Massacre from the Jim Waters documentary, The Guns of November 3rd. Local pastors in Greensboro are now calling on the city council to issue an apology for the events that led to the 1979 murders. Well, for more, we're joined by Dr. Marty Nathan, widow of Dr. Mike Nathan. He was one of the 5 people killed in that 1979 massacre. She and other survivors successfully sued Klansmen, Nazis, and the Greensboro police. We welcome you to Democracy Now!, Dr. Marty Nathan, joining us from Baltimore. You were there this weekend. Can you describe what happened 40 years ago? Lay out the scene for us, the horror.
I first want to thank you so much, Amy, for having me on Democracy Now! And focusing on this really important historical incident. What happened 40 years ago was that my friends, a very diverse group of people who were planning an anti-Klan conference in Greensboro, and preceding it by a march that was to have started in the black community and then gone across town. They were preparing for that march. They were singing, they were chanting, and into the middle of it drove 9 carloads of Ku Klux Klansmen and American Nazis who yelled out racial slurs. People chanted death to the Klan, and a shot was fired from the front of the caravan. People began to run towards the back of the caravan in fear of the shots. And some of the Klansmen poured out of those cars and started beating people, slashing people with knives. And then from the end of the caravan, which was where people were running towards, the men with the long guns, the high-powered rifles, the shotguns, took their guns out and very deliberately, without any seeming fear or worry about being caught for murder, began shooting people down. 5 people were murdered, including my husband, Mike, and 10 people were injured. The police were nowhere to be found, even though actually the 10th car in that caravan of Klansmen and Nazis was an unmarked police car which contained the controller of the leader of the Klan and Nazis, who himself was an informant for the Greensboro police and had been an informant and was communicating with the FBI. That policeman in the last car did nothing except his partner took pictures. And the murders were accomplished. And some people who were working on Central America at the time and then a little bit later in the 1980s would see the similarities between this action and a North American death squad.
What happened? Who was put on trial? What were the results of the trials?
6 Klansmen and Nazis, the actual shooters. Oh, I wanted to say that, as you saw in that videotape, in fact, all of this was not a mystery. It was all caught by 4 TV cameras on videotape. And so the 6 known shooters were put on trial for murder, and an all-white jury acquitted them in a trial where the prosecution, who was supposed to be, as we all know, representing the victims, us, was very openly anti-communist and anti-union. These people were all union organizers and leaders, both at Duke University Hospital and also at the Cone Mills Textiles. The prosecution said terrible things about us, and that was reflected in the media itself. And then an all-white racist jury was chosen. The prosecution never even alluded to the fact that the Greensboro police informant had organized and led this caravan of Klansmen and Nazis who murdered people. Never alluded to the fact that that man, Ed Dawson, had received the parade permit from the police and was being paid by the police, and never alluded to the fact that pretty much everybody in the police department, all the way up to the chief of police and to the mayor, knew that some violence was going to happen to these people who were gathering in an anti-Klan march.
Marty, we only have 30 seconds.
Sorry.
There were 2 trials. In both cases, all white juries, and the perpetrators were acquitted.
They were. And afterwards, we did the Greensboro civil rights suit, in which we proved all the things that I just said, plus the fact that an alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agent was in the Nazis as well.
And
this
finally,
was a North American death squad.
Faith leaders now calling for the city to issue a full apology for what took place 40 years ago.
As are we, the victims of the massacre. They have issued a very hollow apology. Sorry for your loss. We need, and I would ask people across the country to write to the city of Greensboro to demand a full, in-depth apology for criminal action on their part.
Dr. Marty Nathan, widow of Dr. Mike Nathan. She is a survivor. He died 40 years ago. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.